What is up, people? Welcome back to the Story Strengthcast with myself, Shane Story. Hope we're all having a fantastic day, whatever day you're watching this on or listening to this on. If you're watching this, you're probably getting a good laugh. I have my microphone dangling down from above me. I broke the mount, so I am reduced to having it just hang down like I am Big Shaq in Fire in the Booth. So yeah, today we are going to be going through the ultimate guide for fat loss. I haven't done a full fat loss episode in a long time, and I don't think I've done one quite like this where we're going to go through everything from nutrition setup, training setup, cardio setup, steps, and other aspects that will ultimately lead to success when it does come to dropping body fat. By the end of the episode, you should have a completely crystal clear idea as to how to get to about 10% body fat, right? Which not many people can do. And there's big reasons for that, which we are going to uncover within this actual episode, and common reasons why people fuck up and fail within their diets and just never end up reaching that golden land. Before we get into the episode, however, if you have been enjoying them, if you do me a big favor and leave me a rating on the podcast platform that you're listening on, it does help the podcast grow, helps me attract better guests over time as well as if you are interested in coaching. That is my full-time job. I am an online coach. I work with people who, like the avatar we're going to go through today, want to get absolutely diced and shredded. I help people stick to their gain phases and gain a lot of muscle. I help powerlifters compete at a high level on the platform, and I also help bodybuilders prep for the stage. So if you fall within that category, you've been enjoying my content, you have a good idea as to what I seem like as a person and my methodologies from going through podcasts like this, reach out. Okay, I'd love to help you. I'd love to have a chat, and we can work together towards those big goals that you've been potentially putting off. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the episode. We are going to have an avatar today, and this avatar's name is Declan. Declan wants to get to 10% body fat. He has been training in gym for about 3 years at this point, but he has never been able to reach this point. He has a history of going through diet phases, reaching a certain point, let's call it maybe 12%. He's just about to see his abs, and then he falls at the last hurdle. He works in a desk job. So he works a 9 to 5, and he struggles with things like eating a bit too much the weekend and losing control there. He suffers with a bit of a all or nothing mindset, where if he has a bad week or if he has a bad day, it turns into a bad week. He struggles with being able to adapt his training to his work life, which sometimes runs over time, and he has to stay into work a little bit later. He also struggles with not being able to incorporate flexibility within his diet. He has just this one-track mind as to how to achieve a fat loss goal, which just has his meals be very bland, not too enjoyable, and they are not compatible with his long-term preferences. So this is a pretty common place that a lot of people find themselves when they are looking to shift body fat, all or nothing mindset, struggle around weekends, work a desk job, and almost thinking that their system needs to be perfect for them to actually achieve a fat loss goal. So the first thing that I would do if I was coaching Declan is I would talk through what the timeline is going to be for the goal he has. So how would we go about doing that? So the first thing that we need to ask ourselves, if Declan wants to get to 10% body fat, he's 16 to 80% right now, or 16 to 18%, not 80%. What type of fat loss do we need to achieve? So if we just do the math on that, so if we take his current body composition at the moment, so 88 kilos, we multiply that by 0.16, we are going to get about 14.1 kilos of fat mass that he has. So he has 73.9 kilos of lean mass, that's including bones and organs, and 14.1 kilos of fat. Now, if he's 18%, that's going to go up to about 15.8 kilos of fat mass and to about 72.8 kilos of lean mass. So his lean body mass around 72 to 74 kilos. So that's him completely fatless, not 10%. So we need to kind of get where 10% is going to be then. So once we've got his lean body mass, now we need to ask ourselves, what weight does he need to be at 10% body fat? So if we were taking a first example of him at 16% body fat, he will need to be 82.1 kilos to be 10% body fat. If he was starting at 18% body fat, he will need to get to 80.2. So we're looking anywhere between a 6 to 8 kilo drop across the given amount of time that we're going to allocate. So once we have that estimated amount of time that we are going to aim to drop the body fat in, we need to then start looking at, okay, how long will this take us, and what are the things that have maybe failed him in the past? So we can maybe layer onto one of Declan's issues is that he has tried to do previous diet phases way too fast. So he massively cuts down on his calories. Maybe he just slashes his total daily energy expenditure in half and just goes hard. He overdoes the cardio too. And as a result, this is also causing him to maybe get to that 12% mark, and he is just continually failing once he gets there, right? He is having his he is going into some maybe binge restrict cycles around the weekend. He's been really good Monday through Friday, and he is just like losing some control as he gets to that point, because it's getting very, very hard to stick about the calorie deficit, the way he has the meal set up, his lack of control around the weekend, his inability to create flexibility in other areas of life, whether it's training or through his diet. So we know probably from these type of struggles that this guy, if he has only ever done the hard and fast way, that we probably need to go with a bit of a slower rate of gain. Now, considering that one of his goals is to get to 10% body fat and assumingly maintain a lot of muscle, or put him in even a position where his training is enjoyable, he can still progress, and there could be even a case where he could continue to have a tiny bit of muscle gain occur and have some recomp happen during the fat loss phase. Well, then we might say, okay, let's go with a bit more of a slow rate of loss that is going to be still in line with achieving those goals. So we have our kind of framework here in place of how much body fat he needs to lose. We have an idea as to what the actual strategy will be. And then from there, we need to think about how we are going to create that deficit. Now, before I go into the actual deficit and how we're going to create that, what we're going to do from a nutritional setup, I want to first introduce you to a 3-tier model that I use with a lot of clients when it does come to improving adherence. Because I think the discussion around adherence is one that people often miss. And this is going to completely speak towards the fact that Declan has struggled with this all or nothing mindset. That if you're not 100% on plan, then there's no point doing the plan at all. For pretty much every aspect of the coaching process that I have with my clients, I use this 3-tier model. And that's going to be good, better, best. I've maybe talked about this in previous podcasts too, where what we're doing is we're trying to set the stage for an always winning mindset, that you can always have actions that are going towards your fat loss goals, your strength goals, whatever it may be. Because ultimately at the end of the day, while we will be striving towards maximum performance and maximum adherence, sometimes life can get in the way and take us away from that. It could be a case that we are just underprepared on a given day. It could be a case that some life stress pops up out of nowhere. And sometimes striving towards a maximum becomes very, very difficult to do. And in some circumstances, actually impractical. So we need to have some type of framework in place that is still kind of putting us in the mindset of what can I still do today that is going to help me achieve my goal. So that's what the good, better, best is going to encompass. And I'm going to go through that for both the nutrition setup. I'm going to go through for the training setup, as well as the steps and cardio section, because at any given time, there's always something you could do to move the dial forward. And this is the mindset that I want you, the listener, and Declan to put in their mind, because even on your worst day, there's still something you need to do. And the minimum amount of effort that we need to actually put towards a goal like fat loss is actually not that complicated whatsoever. It just requires that forward thinking mindset. So let's go into creating the deficit. So Declan now has his goal, right? He knows what body weight that we're aiming for across the timeline. But the timeline can only really be put in place once we decide on a rate of loss. One of the big things to take with And one of the reasons why we will use a timeline is to actually make the process seem a little bit more urgent and put you to a mindset where this process is, number one, not going to be forever. So it makes the actual plan a lot more palatable, but it makes each day and each week that little bit more meaningful, which in my eyes is extremely important. When you don't have a timeline in place and it's just, I want to get to 10% and I'll just going to take as long as it takes, is it kind of bakes into your approach over flexibility, right? We're going to talk about like introducing flexibility within this podcast, but when we don't have that timeline in place, it can cause you to be flexible over the bounds of where you should be aiming for with the likes of your calorie intake and even just taking the piss as such, right? You end up adding in way more calories across the weekend, or you have a weekend that's completely off. You haven't even hit the good threshold for what's needed to create the fat loss. And as a result, you are a little bit behind or you're stalled. Now, once you open the gate for that, it opens the gate for you to do it more often. And that creates this cycle effect of you essentially never really kind of getting towards your goal because you haven't given yourself a deadline to actually achieve it by. So when I'm setting up a fat loss phase for clients, I will put down the timeline. I'll take their body weight, the exact same I'm doing here. I'll put in what their estimated goal will look like, and then plan out a target rate of loss for them per week. And the aim is for us to continue up with that rate of loss on any given week. And if we're not, we make an adjustment. But we're going to go through adjustments as well later on in the podcast. So let's talk about how we are going to set up our calorie intake first and foremost. So when we're looking at setting up a diet, going between 0.5 to 1% of body weight per week in terms of loss is a pretty sustainable rate loss for most people. The higher rate loss is going to be preserved for people who are quite high in body fat. So we're talking maybe 20% or more. They can definitely get away with those faster rates while not having as much muscle loss occur. The leaner you are, the closer you want to be to the lower side of that, so 0.5. And there is even some research looking at people losing in deficits where they're losing about 0.5% of body weight per week, and they can actually still gain some lean body mass. So considering Declan, again, hasn't succeeded with these faster rates of loss, he is 16 to 18%, so he does have a good bit of body fat on him, but he's not obese by any mark, right? He's not too far off seeing his abs realistically, right? What we can do is we can start off on the lower end. And so now that we've discussed that, we can start to create the deficit. When we're looking at creating a deficit, we've got three different models we can use here: assume, estimate, and observe. Observe is my favorite one, which I use with clients, but I'm going to go through the assume example mainly for this podcast. So when we use assume, we are essentially taking how many calories do you burn per kilogram of body weight, and we just multiply that until we get the number that is going to be your total daily energy expenditure. So how many calories you burn on a daily basis. So for Declan, if he's 88 kilos, his maintenance is probably going to be around 2,900. So we can multiply his body weight in kilos by 33 and we will get 2,900. Now for that moderate rate of loss that we're talking about, where we're losing about 0.5% of his body weight, what we need to do from here is we need to get what a 0.5 rate of loss looks like from a calorie perspective. So what we do here is we take 7,700. So 7,700 is the amount of energy within 1 kilo fat. From here, what you'll do is you'll take 0.5 of this. Okay, so multiply it by 0.5. You'll get 3,850. And then you can divide that across 7 days. That is now going to give you your deficit. So you take that number from the 2,900, and for Declan, his energy deficit and his calories are going to be 2,465. So with this rate of loss, if he was to stick to it 100% and everything was go swimmingly, which it doesn't always, he should reach his goal in about 12 to 16 weeks. Okay. Now, this is depending on whether he is at that 16 to 18%. If it is 18%, he's going to take the 16 weeks. If he's at 16%, if he's at the 18%, he's going to take 16 weeks. If he's at 16%, he's going to take 12 weeks. So that is a pretty nice time window that we have now. And now we can put this into our timeline that we're roughly looking for about 500 grams of a loss per week. And this is going to put him at dropping roughly about a pound or so per week. So this is something that's nice and measurable. And the way we will take stock of this is we will just measure his weight on a daily basis. So what I reckon all my clients do is when they wake up in the morning, you go to the bathroom, you have your scale visible within the bathroom, so it's in your line of sight, so it's very hard to not actually skip doing the weigh-in. After you went to the bathroom, step on the scale, record a number, put it into your tracker, and then we'll start to form a little log of your weights. And then from here, what we're doing is we're trying to take stock of this across the 7-day period. The 7-day period gives us a 7-day average. The 7-day average, that is the number that we really want to focus on. And this is important for the observe part of this section. Regardless of whether you use that approach, which I talked there with the assume method, and if you want to have the actual numbers, you can just look at the description below, and I have made a document which is kind of covering all of these for you. Regardless if you use that method or not, or you go onto some type of total daily energy expenditure calculator, you are going to have to do the observe method anyway, because these numbers cannot simply encompass every single person on the planet, right? They're rough estimations. So the observe method is what you're doing throughout the entire of the fat loss process. So once we set his deficit calories at 2465, what we're essentially assuming is that he'll follow the protocol for the week, both his steps, his calories, his macros. He'll log all his body weights across 7 days. We'll repeat that into week number 2. When we get to week number 2, we should see that there is a 500 gram drop in terms of the deficit, or close enough to it. Okay. Now there could be some like a little bit kind of deviation either side. Okay. But like, if we're within 100 grams of our target, that's still accurate enough. If that is the trend that's observed, then we know that we're on the right path. If we notice that even after we've made this adjustment, that we're way below the target rate of loss, or we're way over the rate of loss, well, then that's maybe something for us to adjust. So if we're way below, of course, well, that means the deficit is not great enough, so we need to make some type of adjustment. We might just look at a 200 calorie drop again. If it is a case where we have overshot the mark and we have gotten way above the 0.5, maybe we're closer to a kilo, okay, now we can add a little bit more food in. Now, this comes with a caveat that the first week of you going through deficit approach, you may notice a greater rate of loss in the first week. And this is not necessarily just because you've lost body fat. It's because there's also been a drop in body water, there's been a drop in glycogen, and a drop in food content. So you might see in the first week, there's a very big drop. So maybe even it would be a better idea to have that first week to be like a placeholder. Then you have your second week and your third week, and they're the areas where you're gonna see that true change happen. So week number 1 is a placeholder where you just find your feet with the diet, following the approach with the likes of the calories, your new step protocol, and training, whatever. And then week number 2 to week number 3, that's where you look at the 7-day average from both of them and look to assess the change. Again, if it's in line with the 500 gram rate of loss, we are on the money and we don't need to change anything. And now we just need to kind of keep those calories constant going forward. So now that we've went through our calories, we need to discuss how we are going to make up those calories. So calories are just a unit of energy, but we have our macronutrients that make up our calories. So they are our protein, our carbs, and our fats. So how are we going to go about calculating these? So the way I go about this is we are working within ranges for pretty much all of them. Now, most commonly, I'm going to set people's protein range first and foremost. And that's going to be within a pretty broad range of 1.6 all the way up to 2.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. So the lower end exists for maybe those who are coming into this process with a habitually low protein intake. They are not used to getting in protein with every single meal, and maybe even their appetite is really, really low. So even at this low range, they can still get the most amount of benefit from having a high protein diet in regards to the lean mass retention and even lean mass building. If they've been coming from a low protein intake, it's likely they're going to start to gain more muscle if they just start to increase it during the deficit phase. But this guy, right? This guy, he is, again, somebody who struggles with hunger, as we can see from what we discussed earlier. And he is already somebody who's been in gym for a number of years. He's probably already like eating above the 1.6, right? Maybe he's at 1.8 or so. But hunger has been an issue. And with that, we might decide to drive up the protein content, right? Because protein, especially depending on the source that you pick, it can have ability to improve satiety. So what we might do with him, especially because one of his goals is to potentially build some muscle and also have as much lean mass retention or muscle retention through the fat loss process as possible, we might go that little bit higher. So let's say I put him on the higher end, right? We go to 2.4 grams per kilogram body weight. So that's going to put him based off his 88 kilos, up to 210 grams of protein per day. Now, off the back of that, we are going to look at our fat intake, okay? So fat intake, I pull from total calories. So that's going to be anywhere between 20 to 35% of total calories. So that for him is going to be 55 grams to 95 grams per day, which is a pretty big range. Now, the reason the range is so big, again, it's really just based off preferences, right? A lot of health organizations and health bodies will say for optimal health, be between 25 to 35% of your total calories. However, we know that even as low as 20% can still be good for supporting optimal hormone function during a deficit phase. And considering lean mass retention is a big focal point here, I might get him to start off on this lower end of 55 grams per day. With that now, we have our total protein for the day, we have our total fats. These are going to cost us a certain amount of calories. So our protein intake, for example, is going to cost us 840 calories per day. So that's taking protein multiplied by 4. And then our fats are going to be 495 calories. So what we'll do here, and that's as fats are 9 calories per gram. So the most energetic macronutrient. So what we'll do then is we will add these two together. We'll get 1,335. We'll divide this by 4 and we'll get 333 grams. Now, if I was writing this plan, I wouldn't put in 333. I'd probably just put in 335 or 330. I find it weird when I look at people's calories, they maybe post them online or something like that, and their macronutrient values are like 211 or 56. Mainly because there's no way for us to be that accurate when it does come to actually tracking them, nor actually calculating them for somebody's given needs on any day. One thing we're actually doing with deficit, as you see, right? So we went from 2,900 down to 2,465. We pull deficits down by as much as well. We have to assume that people's energy needs are going to fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, and our macronutrient needs are likely in flux as well. So for the sake of actually accounting for those day-to-day variances, as well as the fact if somebody sees 56 grams of fat in a protein, as well as if somebody sees 56 grams of fat on a plan or 211 grams of fat or 211 grams of protein on a plan, they might think that there's a really hyper-specific reason as to why it needs to be that amount. Whereas we know that if there's slight deviations, even day to day, there's going to be no real impact to your results over long term. Which is where I'm going to introduce the 3-tier model for our nutrition. So when I'm looking at body fat change over a long period of time, as I said, I'm telling people to strive towards the maximum. So I really want Declan here to be striving towards 210 grams protein per day, 95 grams of fat, 330 grams of carbohydrates. However, some days that may not be feasible. And I don't want him slipping into this all or nothing thinking, where if he doesn't hit these to the gram, he has fucked up. I also don't want him getting overly neurotic where like if he pulls out a potato out of the bag, the potato is 205 grams and he needs 200 grams, so he's going to try to cut off the 5 grams. Right? Or he's going to rummage through all the potatoes in the pack until he finds one that's exactly 200. I don't want to create these neurotic tendencies because they don't help, but they create this a rigid mindset around food that ultimately doesn't serve people in the long term. So with this 3-tier system, we can start off with good. What is going to be the main thing that is going to help us drive this fat loss forward? So at the very base of this is going to be hitting the calories. And with calories, I'm saying, okay, with the 2,465, I'm going to set you. I'd like you to be within 50 calories of this calorie target. So 50 calories either side. So at the base of this system, so at the base of this model is going to be a calorie intake. We know that if you hit your calories on every given day, we will see this drive in weight loss down. And this is something you can realistically hit in any given day, even if you're not really that well planned, if you do a bit of adjusting through the likes of your tracking app throughout the day. So with this, I'm going to give him a range of not just hit your calories to 2465. And again, feeling as if he doesn't hit 2465 on the money, that he's failed. No, we're going to give you a range. So let's go 100 calories either side. So that means at the low end, I want you to hit 2365. And at the high end, I want you to hit 2565. Okay. Now, what this does is it creates a bit of breathing space on any given day. If he goes slightly above, if he forgot to track in his food and he's tracking in at the end of the day, he's slightly above, he's not going to lose the plot because he's slightly above his range. Or if he has something else that comes into his dinner, maybe his missus cooks him something and it's a little bit higher than his calorie intake allows him to, but he is able to go up a tiny bit more. Cool, that breeds in a tiny bit of flexibility. And again, kind of breeds in this always winning mindset. The same way, if he was ill prepared, he got home after a long day of work, he opened the fridge and some of his meals were, or some of his key foods are missing, and he's not able to meet his total calorie intake. Okay, don't sweat it if you're 100 calories under. Just go to bed. It's not really that big of a deal, and it's allowing him to see that even on a day that's not perfect, that he's still acting in line with the goal he's looking to set. Now, once we layer in the next tier to this, which is going to be better, is going to be adding in the element of protein. So calories will help you drive weight change. Protein will help you drive fat loss. Now, this is something that I will really push towards the majority of my clients the most of the time as the number one thing that we want to ingrain as a habit is be very protein seeking in new environments or environments you're not really able to control. The reason for it being is because it has the benefits of driving that fat loss, muscle retention, as well as being something that's going to add a bit of a break to your hunger levels. So when we're looking at this, we go up to better. We say, okay, let's go 100 calories either side. And also, we're going to have our protein set within 20 grams. So if he's aiming for 210, we already know he's striving towards a maximum level of intake. That's going to give him a range of benefits, even if he falls all the way to 1.6. But if he hits 190 up to 230, again, it just allows for these extra bits of flexibility to poke in throughout the week if it so happens. Or if he pulls a steak out of the fridge, he doesn't need to chop off a bit of the steak to keep it in his protein intake. And it's also just a really important point to note is that these things are not going to happen on every single day where you're going to have to fall towards tier 2 and tier 3 of good and better, right? Most of the time, if you're well planned, you're going to be able to strive towards tier 1, which is our best. And even with that, even if you're at the bottom, tier 3, if we're saying, okay, he's going to lose 0.5% of his body weight per week, right? That's taking into account the 7-day deficit, right? The 7-day working average. Even if he is within that 100 gram range that I talked about, he's at the high end, all that does is it just reduces the rate of loss slightly. So it may just add a tiny bit more time to his goal, but he's still able to continue driving fat loss. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind that if your deficit is set up in an appropriate way, that even if you're slightly above 100 calories, you should still lose a pretty decent fat across the week. Because again, it's the total sum of the deficit that makes a difference at the end of the week. This is not to give you a pass and going over your calories, but it's just for you to know that if you do have days that's slightly over, it's not really a big deal in the long run. It just might add on a tiny bit of time to your fat loss. And that's only if. Because again, come back to the variation in day-to-day energy expenditure, you might have some days where you actually burn that many calories per day or even more, and it's actually creating more of a deficit. So the point of having a calorie in set point and the calorie targets is really just so that we have a strategic number to aim towards and we have some type of way to standardize all this process. Now, if we move into tier 1, which is going to be something I'm going to be striving towards, I'm getting Declan to strive towards this if he really wants to improve his ability to optimize his whole fat loss approach. So we're going to look at calories, again, plus or minus 100 calories. We're going to look at protein intake, plus or minus 20 grams, and then we can layer in the carbs and fats. So with carbs and fats, what we're thinking about these for is carbs supporting our training performance, fat intake supporting hormone function. Now, with a lot of people, they may find that they actually sit better in tier 2. just because of how their day-to-day is set up in regards to incorporating more flexibility, maybe have more meals out, or maybe they have food prepared from by either a parent or by their partner. With that will come varying levels of carb and fat intake. And some people as well just like a little bit more variety within their day-to-day, and maybe like to have these levels undulate. Now, it's not perfect, purely just based off the fact that, like, if you do have wildly fluctuation carbohydrate and fat levels, maybe sometimes training performance can take a hit as well, which is why this is considered, in my eyes, to be the best that we're aiming towards, right? So carbohydrates, if they're sustained at consistent levels, you're going to have better training performance. If you have better training performance through the diet, you're going to be able to retain more muscle tissue, which is ultimately the goal of any fat loss phase. Now, what we can layer into our nutrition here, because it's not all about the likes of protein, carbs, fats, we need to also layer in something like fiber. So fiber is an underrated tool for fat loss. Many people skip over this once they have their macros set up. And what I'd be looking for here from a fiber perspective is having 10 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories. So with Declan now that he's having 2,400 calories essentially, what we might say here is, okay, high end or sufficient. So one of the big roles for fiber is that it is acting as a waste disposal system. So while we do already have our large intestine to sort that out for us, it does need some assistance, especially when we're having high protein intakes and we are eating a decent amount of food. When we include more fiber, we accelerate or we just improve our digestive function. We're able to go number 2 more often, and we're able to get clear all the waste that's not really meant to be sitting in our digestive tract for too much longer, right? You have to remember that what we're kind of excreting is the stuff that our body doesn't want. So this is helping us to kind of get that out of our body. And from a practical perspective here, if you're looking at the likes of the weight in the scale, well, if you have low fiber intakes or very varying fiber intakes, it could be a case that you get backed up really often. You get constipated. Now, that masks fat loss. You could be seeing that the weight is like sitting still on the scale, but you see some body fat changes, or you're just feeling like a bit distended. This is a call to maybe kind of increase some fiber levels within the actual diet itself. So that's one important function. Another important function is that it helps to stabilize your blood sugar. So when we do consume fiber, it does help to reduce blood sugar spikes that happen as a result of having some carbohydrates coming into the diet. So if, for example, you were having a meal today or having multiple meals throughout the day, and there is no fiber present, you have a high amount of carbohydrates, you could feel quite sluggish after that meal. And this is because of that postprandial glucose spike that does happen as a result of your body releasing more insulin. Now, when you do have more fiber within your diet, that spike in blood sugar is flattened out to a bit more of a curve. And this, in turn, is helping you to have more sustained energy throughout the day. As well as when you do have that big peak in blood sugar and a big drop, you often get quite hungry. And this is another way that fiber is helping you with maintaining satiety levels, that you're not having that big drop in blood glucose, which is driving you to want to seek out more foods to fill the gap. And then also coupled with that, not just the benefit of slowing down that blood sugar response, is the makeup of fibrous foods. So we think about fruits and vegetables. We think about whole grain carbs. We think about nuts and seeds. If we think about the texture of them, they take us a longer time to eat, right? There's more chewing involved, more mastication. And this also is helping us to, and as well, they're also bringing up the size of a meal. So we have a higher volume of food. Food is taking us that little bit longer to chew and masticate and break down. This is also giving our stomach plenty of time to send really important signals up to our brain to let us know that we're starting to get full. And then the final point of fiber is that it is just helping us to improve our micronutrient content. So micronutrient is the next layer, really, when it does come to considering our nutrition setup during the fat loss phase. We think about calories being the thing that's modulating our weight, your protein, our carbs, and fats, which are helping us to manage our body composition. And then we have the likes of our micronutrients, which are essentially helping us manage how we feel and our energy throughout the day. So these are really important factors when it does come to the likes of your fat loss, right? If you have all your calories sorted out, your protein, carbs, fats, But if you feel like shit day to day, the fat loss phase is not really going to serve you too well. If you're feeling really hungry all day, the fat loss phase is going to be short lived, and it's going to impact your quality of life. And another way I actually look at this is when we think about what we're getting out of our protein, carbs, fats, the metabolism of a lot of them, our body is going to require vitamins and minerals as coefficients or as coenzymes to help us harness more of their use. So when we include more fibrous foods, which as a result may have more of these vitamins and minerals, even additional compounds like polyphenols, we're now getting more leverage out of our protein, carbs, fats, which is really, really important as our calorie intake goes down. When you are in a gaining phase or a maintenance phase and you have sufficient nutrition coming in, it's less of an issue. But the less calories that you do have, the more you really want to leverage the calories you're taking in and the macronutrients that you're taking in. You want to ensure that you're getting all the effects out of them as possible. So this is another big reason as to why you should include some more fiber within your diet. So now we went through the calories and the macronutrients and fiber, and we've kind of given all these targets off the Declan. It's not good enough to just say, have at it. Now, one thing I'll do with a lot of clients is I will give them some type of structure for their meals that I want them to build out from, okay? So we'll determine how many times a day they are going to eat. So for Declan right now, he's spreading all of his calories across 6 meals across the day, right? He's heard that 6 meals is going to be better for stoking the metabolic furnace. He has heard that bodybuilders eat 6 times a day. They're jacked, so it must be something he should do. Now, one big issue with this is that when we're looking at having very high meal frequencies, it doesn't really kind of create a scenario for adherence for many, many people. Mainly because the food intakes they're now taking in are very low per meal. And as well, they're always eating, right? And keep in mind that Declan, he's struggled with this all or nothing mindset. So if he can't have 6 meals a day, it's not worth it. So what we need to do is you need to break this down to something that's going to be a lot more practical, and it's also going to help him with adherence. Considering hunger has been an issue in previous diets, and he's been spreading these very low calorie meals, keeping in mind that he came from this aggressive dieting background, he's maybe having meals that are like 200, 300 calories a piece. So what we want to do with him now that he's having about 2,400 calories per day, we want to maybe kind of split that down across anywhere between 3 to 5 meals. Now, considering he's started off at 6, let's kind of go against the 5 and maybe let's go with 3 to 4. I do find for most people, 4 is a nice little sweet spot because you're essentially able to get 4, because you're able to get 3 main meals and maybe a snack filtered in there. And that's going to be handy enough to spread across the whole day with good timings between each of them. And it also is helping us to ensure that per meal, we're still able to get a decent amount of the nutrients that we're really looking for. So if we keep in mind that he's having 210 grams of protein per day, if he's looking to spread that across 4 meals, that means he's looking to have around 50 grams of protein per meal. We also need to consider that he has his fiber target. So fiber target across 4 meals is going to have about 9 grams of fiber per meal. Now, some meals you might have a little bit more fiber than others, and that's completely normal, it's completely expected. And even around some meals, that might be something that you'd even advise her. Now, when we look at this 4 meals across the day, now we've decided, okay, he needs to have 50 grams of protein per meal. And what are the key areas to have these meals within? So if Declan trains at the evening time, it's probably better off that first meal, we don't have it as soon as you wake up. Maybe he wakes up at 7 a.m. to get to work. It's 7 a.m., has a shower, gets himself organized for the day, commutes to work. He gets into the office for 9. Now maybe what we might do is, considering most people when they wake up and they just start eating and they do it as a point of habit, but then all of a sudden they've got this gap between, say for example, if Declan started his meal times at 8 a.m. and now he has to wait until 2 p.m. to have his next meal, well then this might create the scenario where he is going to be absolutely ravenous throughout the entire morning, and this will make even adherence at the subsequent meal or even later on the evening time that little bit more difficult. So what we do in the early portion of the day can really set itself up for success later on into the evening time. So what we might do, considering he's not hungry at this time, is we might push out that first meal. So we might push out that meal to the first break he may be able to get in work. So that might be 11 a.m. So 11 a.m. he has his first meal. And then what we'll do is we'll try to get him to not eat every 3 to 4 hours as such. but we'll just say, okay, this is when you're starting, and maybe this is when you're ending the food. So maybe he has his last meal at 8 p.m. at night, okay, after he comes in from the gym. So now you have our start point, and we have our end point. So 11 a.m. and 8 a.m. So 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. So now we will look at when we're going to have our second meal and our third meal. So 2 p.m. is typical time. A lot of people are going to have lunch at. So that's 3 hours later. Boom. 2 p.m. meal number 2. And then we can have a meal just before we go to the gym. Maybe we have something relatively light, so he's not completely stuffed going into the gym. And then we'll have a training session, and his final meal is his post-work meal at 8 p.m. So that gives us really nice gaps now between our meals. So we have 3 hours from meal number 1 to meal number 2, meal number 2 to meal number 3, another 3 hours, and then meal number 3 to meal number 4, another 3 hours. Okay. Now, there's nothing magic about the gaps here. The main thing is that there's not a huge amount of space between them, right? So we know that if we have a huge gap between meals, like 4, 5, 6 hours, that it is really, really likely that we're going to start to have a lot more hunger symptoms come into the mix. And once hunger symptoms come into the mix, it's going to be very difficult for us to make the good choice that we want towards our fat loss goal. And considering, again, this is something that Declan has struggled with, this is something that's going to be really, really key for him. Now, waiting until 11 a.m., if he hasn't done this before, initially might seem like a bit of a challenge. But if he wakes up, has his coffee at 8 a.m., he will likely just be able to do his most productive hours of work before he gets to 11 and has his breakfast or his first meal without really feeling too much of it. A lot of people will find that if they do this in an early portion of the day, they don't feel as hungry as they'd expect to. And this is due to a number of different factors, but your body is starting to circulate more free fatty acids during this period versus having your body really depend on the likes of glucose, which does start to happen more as we kind of come through the day, and we're starting to increase our blood sugar with the likes of the foods that we're eating. And once he has a final meal at 8 p.m., he's able to relax, chill, get to bed at 10, and then wake up the next day having got 7 to 8 hours of sleep or whatever like that, and he has optimized himself for another good day of hitting his nutrition targets. Now, with the first meal, it is important that once you do break that fast, you do have a decent amount of protein within it. So he's going to have his 15 grams of protein there, and I advise him to have something that has a decent amount of fiber in it too. So a lot of times people find that they have that first meal, it's very rich in carbohydrates, fats, low in fiber and low in protein, that they don't even last lunch, and they feel like they want to have a bit more of a snack. And again, this is coming back to the fact that fiber is going to help you to manage your blood sugar better, but protein can also have this effect too, as well as being quite satiating in regards to its macronutrient. And this is also true of protein, which is quite satiating because it does take a lot longer for your body to break down. So a good example here of what you could have for that very first meal is going to tie into the next part where we're going to talk about structuring your meals from a source point of view. So for most of the meals, we're going to look for that 50 grams of protein. So that 50 grams of protein, that could come from a meat source, a dairy source. It could even come from a more refined source, a processed source like whey protein. So an example that you could use would be something as common as protein oats. So you have the fiber coming from the likes of your oats. You have your protein powder that you may mix in, or maybe you mix in something like low-fat Greek yogurt, and maybe you make overnight oats. So maybe you make them the night before. You mix in some Greek yogurt, some whey protein, some milk or low-fat almond milk or something like that. That's going to keep him conscious of his calories. Puts that in the fridge overnight. Wakes up the next morning. Boom. He hasn't really had to take any time to prepare or anything that in the morning now because it's all done the night before. He wakes up in the morning, he adds in maybe some frozen berries or something of the likes, maybe adds in some nuts or some seeds, and just from having some oats in the morning, adding in some nuts, seeds, some berries, as well as the protein source, now he's hit a decent amount of his nutrition targets from a nutrition quality point of view, his protein, his fiber, some fats, some healthy carbs, and he's less likely to try to be playing catch up later on in the day. Because when people have lower protein intakes in the morning, another issue they run into is that later on in the evening time, they are trying to hit their protein targets or they fall short because they just can't fit as much protein into a single meal. So trying to set the stage for winning early on in the day by getting a decent amount of fiber within there, a decent amount of protein is going to set him up for success, as well as managing his hunger and his energy throughout the day now. Now, the next meal he comes into it could be something that he has easily prepped. So one thing I kind of recommend everybody do, if you're listening to this and this is maybe you're struggling with this, you know what your macronutrients and everything are that you want to aim for, the targets, what you really need to do is you need to think of it from a conceptual point of view, right? So, or a practical point of view, even. You need to decide what are like 5 main protein sources that I really enjoy and I can keep consistent on a day-to-day basis. What can I do from a 5 carbohydrate source on a day-to-day basis? 5 fat sources. From there, 5 to 10 fruit and vegetable sources. Now, once you have this built out, you have a framework for building out your meals. You have a go-to breakfast. So that's going to be something that's simple and easy to prep, the likes of your overnight oats, or even just protein oats that's made within the microwave or whatever like that. Then in the lunchtime, you need to decide, okay, what's going to be a suitable lunch I can prepare here that's going to be quick and easy, something that Declan could bring into the office with him, even heat up in the microwave at work. Well, simple thing he could do here, something I recommend a lot of my clients do, is something I do myself. Buy a rice cooker, right? A rice cooker is an absolute hack if you want to stay consistent with carbohydrate sources and even fiber sources, right? So one thing I'll do if I'm quite busy is I will get my rice cooker. I'll throw in some stock, like 2 stock cubes, and that will be my rice for the day. But not only that, I might get a frozen bag of vegetables, right? So I'll rotate through a couple of different ones. So there could be like a stir fry mix one, or it could be a classical one, which is just like carrots, sweet corn, peas, green beans. And I'll get the veg mix and I'll dump it all into the actual rice cooker, or dump the portion that I'm going to allocate for that meal or for the meals I'm having. Turn it on. You can do that overnight. The next morning you wake up, that's all prepared for you. Now, while that's cooking, right? The night time when he's after coming in for work or whatever like that, or Declan's after coming in for work, he's doing his meal prep for the next day. He could also be having a batch of protein sources cooking in the oven or in the air fryer, right? So he could have all his protein sources for his lunch meals prepped throughout the day. So what we can look at here is say, okay, right, he has chicken breast for his main protein source for this meal. He needs to prep enough chicken so that he has 5 days worth of chicken, or at least 3 days at a time. And he could store that in the fridge and chop it up and put it into his meal prep the next morning when he wakes up. When he wakes up, he has the rice, he has his vegetables, which are providing his fiber source, his chicken providing the protein source, puts that in a lunchbox, maybe puts a sauce or seasoning or something like that on it, like sriracha or whatever, box that up, brings that into lunch. That's his one and only meal that he really needs to prep to bring to work. Now maybe he has something light that he has at his 5 o'clock meal for his pre-training meal. So again, this could be something that he could easily bring with him to work, or even buy in the shop prior to going to training. So a very simple thing you can look at here. It could be, all right, if you didn't have protein oats in the morning time or didn't use yogurt in the morning time, now maybe he looks at his Greek yogurt in his pre-training meal. Alongside that, he might add in some honey. He might add in a banana. He might add in some other type of carbohydrate source, whatever it may be. Now, and then with his meal, and then as he gets to meal 3, so he now has meal 2 sorted for the rest of the week once he's implemented that strategy. And now he gets to meal number 3. And meal number 3, remember, it's something that he's going to have that's going to be quick. It's going to be something that he can maybe pick up at the shop, or he will be able to quickly throw together the night before and bring it to work with him. But it doesn't need to be overly heavy. It doesn't need to be filled with calories, because it's just his pre-training meal. So this could be something that's going to give him maybe 30 to 50 grams of his carbohydrates for the day. It's still providing him with close enough to the 50 grams of protein. Now, if he wanted to have maybe less protein here and more protein in his dinner meal, or more protein in his second meal and less in this one, again, it wouldn't really make a big difference. The 50 grams of protein per meal or 52 grams of protein is just a way to spread it across the day and have it easy and practical to think about. So if he wants to have like 30 grams of protein here, he could have 300 grams of low-fat Greek yogurt. He maybe has a banana alongside that, and that could be enough, or even a square dark chocolate thrown in there as well, right, to maybe kind of provide some type of blunting of blood sugar release as he goes through his workout, right, and to just add in some extra fats there, okay? So he's added in his fiber source there, he's added his protein source, he's getting in some carbohydrates from like easy to digest meal, right, not going to be too heavy in the stomach, gets in the gym, has a workout, comes back in the evening time. Now the evening time, that is his opportunity to be a little bit more flexible, right? And this is his opportunity to maybe use some of the other protein sources he hasn't had throughout today, different carbohydrate sources, and make himself a nice, good, freshly cooked meal. And even with that, depending on how he has his other meals set up throughout the day, he can still have a decent amount of his calorie budget left for this evening meal too, which is something that a lot of people find. If they have more calories in the evening time, they feel that a little better. They feel a little more satiated, and they're able to keep themselves a little bit less hungry as they go through the evening time and before they get to bed. And that final meal is him essentially just topping off the rest of his targets. Now, it is something that I advise all my clients to do when they're going through this process, to plan ahead, right? Most of the time when you're stuck in your routine, your work day, like Declan is here, you find comfort there, you find routine. But even with that meal in the evening time, it's a good idea to pre-plan it maybe the night before or the morning of, just so that you have the plan cemented and that you know exactly how you're going to fill the gaps that your nutrition is maybe not meeting throughout the day. As well as it just kind of bakes in any other times when maybe flexibility come into the plan. Again, if his missus makes dinner for him, he knows exactly what way he needs to budget his calories during the day, maybe tweak amounts, so later on the evening time he's able to fit that meal in. Now, coming into the weekend, which is where he struggles most with, he doesn't have his rigid structure that he has within his work, right? He doesn't have that 9 to 5 setup. But the weekends is where many people, like Declan, fall, because they don't have that structure. Because when they get there, they think, okay, been good all week, time to let the hair down. And what happens? Their meal times get very erratic. They're eating at different times, like way different to what they usually do, or they're not eating as many meals, or maybe they're eating more meals, and they don't have any type of plan really in place. Now, what I recommend to Declan here is, when you get to the weekend, I still want you to eat the same amount of times. I still want you to eat similar food sources, but I want you to incorporate a tiny bit of flexibility. So when it does come to your weekend breakfast, maybe decide, versus having my protein oats, I'm going to add in maybe bacon, eggs, bagel, maybe going to make some protein pancakes. You're still aiming for similar macronutrient levels, but you're just adding in some different food sources that are from your list, right? Your 5 protein, 5 carbohydrate, 5 fat, 5 to 10 fruit and vegetables, and now you're kind of making something that's still in line with your goals. Your meal number 2, maybe this versus what you usually have in work, which is essentially a meal prepped meal. Maybe you make that now, but fresh. Maybe add in some different vegetables. You cook them from fresh. You prepare them from fresh. You put a bit more effort into it. Make it a little bit more tasty. Meal number 3, okay, maybe you're not training on this day. Maybe let's have something a little bit nicer in this yogurt bowl, or we can maybe even sub out for something completely different. Now, at the final meal, again, this is the meal that you've been having flexible all week and been able to maybe vary up or rotating into different types of food sources. Let's keep to that. Or even if you're having a meal with the missus, let's have like a flexible takeaway, right? So you could either go onto Camille Ty's website, some type of takeaway or restaurant that serves meals that you know and you like, but you are going to be easily able to track them within your calorie budget. Or you even make a fake away type setting where you make something that you may order out at a restaurant or eat out from a takeaway, and you make it yourself, but it's all fitting within your calorie budget. This is still allowing you to ensure that you are falling within some of our tiers here, right? Maybe at the weekend, you notice that, okay, being extremely diligent with the likes of my protein, carbs, fats, it might be a little bit more challenging if I'm incorporating more of these flexible takeaways or incorporating more fakeaways that you're making yourself. And now I'm just aiming towards the better side of things, right? Just calories and protein. But you're still making headway towards your goal. And this is something, again, I'm breeding into all of my clients in regards to structuring their weekends like this. Still incorporate routine the same way you would with the likes of midweek, because it's going to set you up for success at the weekend. Once the weekend has no structure, that is where you are going to fall down. And that's exactly what Declan needs here. He needs structured weekends. And this is just going to be a really simple framework for him to follow so he can make the most of it and still continue making steps forward. So from all this, Declan should be pretty good to go on the nutrition side. We've discussed how he can manage his weekends. We've discussed how he can bake in some flexibility to his diet in regards to having not just certain meals that he has to eat to lose body fat, but he has foods now. He has his 5 protein, 5 carb, 5 fat, 5 to 10 fruit and vegetables that he can just rotate throughout the week as he wishes. If he doesn't want to have the chicken with his lunch, he can have mince instead, he can have steak instead, he can have turkey instead, whatever it may be. If he even wants to take that weekend breakfast, right, the bacon and eggs, the bagel, or protein pancakes, and he finds a way to prep them efficiently, he can bring them into work with him and have that as his breakfast, right? Again, there's no real rules, because what he's really aiming towards are those macronutrient values and those targets. He has his range of flexibility. He knows what good, better, best is going to look like, and what he can do, and what he can do at all times to continue moving ahead, and what he can do at all times to continue moving forward with his goal. Now, I didn't go through every single meal prepping strategy under the sun, and the reason for that being is I have a whole podcast episode on that, and you can check it out. I will link it into the show notes so that you can just go to that episode straight away and have a listen to it if you want to, because it is filled with plenty of value. And if you're somebody who does struggle with meal prep and getting everything in order for your work life or whatever it may be, it's going to be one that you need to listen to. Okay, now that we have got through the nutrition section, the next thing we need to talk about is Declan's training. So Declan has always went towards a 6-day-week training program. He has overdone himself with training volume and frequency to the point that the diet phases become even more unsustainable, right? He's coming from an aggressive dieting background, slashing his calories. He's doing so much training that he's not able to recover from. His sessions are taking him a long period of time in the gym, and he's always feeling like he's in the gym, right? He's coming at this from probably the worst approach possible, really, where he's doing everything in his power to get lean, but it is just not working, and he's falling short. He's doing so many days of training, he's eating so little calories, and he's still wondering why it's not working. And that's because being consistent is the number one thing when it does come to driving body composition change. And that also encompasses training. And just doing more training for the sake of doing more training, maybe you're coming at it from the lens of, if I do more training, I'm burning more calories. And while that is true, burning calories is not necessarily the goal of training within a deficit. The goal of training within a deficit is to maintain muscle mass and maintain performance, and do level of training that is allowing you to recover and show up to the next session with plenty of energy. You are fresh and able to perform, and still able to get some extra reps within a training session or add a bit of extra load. So it's important that as you come into a deficit phase, that you reassess what you are actually capable of being consistent with. So it hasn't worked out for Declan because the 6 days a week, it hasn't even fit it within his lifestyle. He is unable to stay consistent with 6 days long term. It's just burning him out. Alongside that, he has other things in life that he still wants to do, right? He wants to spend time with missus. He wants to maybe see his friends, and doing 6 days a week just feels like he's in the gym all the time. And as a result, he gives up before he kind of reaches that 10% body fat that he has been aiming for, because he has the mindset that if you can't do 6 days, well, what's the point of going at all? So what we're going to do with Declan is we are going to shorten this down massively. We're going to see, okay, how many days per week can you 100% say that you can be consistent with year round? And Declan is going to tell me that he can stay consistent with 4. Boom, right? We have 4 days per week. What do we need to focus on for your training? We're going to assume that Declan, he just kind of needs more muscle mass overall, and he needs a pretty balanced program. Now, I have a whole YouTube series as to how to dictate what type of volume you need for a certain exercise or for certain muscle groups, or how to determine what you need to work on from an actual specialization point of view. But most of the time, people are going to benefit from just having a balanced training approach, realistically, right? Without any specialization towards any particular muscle groups, especially when they're in their early stages of development. So what we're going to do with Declan here is we are going to get him onto a 4-day training program, and he's going to be doing 2 lower days and 2 upper days. He's going to have 1 lower day, which is a bit more kind of quad focused. The other lower day is going to start with more hamstrings, so it's going to be more hamstring glute focused. We're going to have 2 upper body days. We're going to do one that's a bit more kind of focused towards anterior based muscle groups, so that's going to be your pressing muscles. And we're going to have one that's more posterior based, which is going to be more posterior based training muscles. We're still getting in all body parts across the week and hitting them twice per week. We're just having an emphasis to one session versus another. So on your 2 upper body days, if you're doing anterior based musculature to start, you're going to do more posterior, so more back work towards the end, and so on. With this, we are going to decide throughout our deficit what are we going to do with our key lifts. So I like to get people to think about having a key lift in each day. So this is one of the main compounds or exercises that we're going to be using as our way to assess performance over the long haul. They should be exercise that you can progress substantially on across a given period of time. So we can think about on the likes of upper body or lower body day, maybe we have a squat, and on a lower body day, we have a deadlift. So on lower body day 1, maybe we use that as a squat or leg press. And then on lower body number 2, where you're going to use something like a deadlift or an RDL. On the likes of our upper body days, we can look at the anterior base day. We're going to do we're going to do a bench press. And on the likes of our posterior day, we might go with like a barbell row or a T-bar row. One of the big reasons I'm putting these in here are to keep his training really, really enjoyable and to encourage overload. So a lot of people, when they do isolations, they will just kind of go through the motions, and especially during the diet phase, and just repeat the same load over and over again. With these lifts, I really want to prioritize strength development. So we are going to program them as such. So we have them at the start of the session, and we're really going to prioritize building strength maybe within like the 5 to 8 rep range. Then after that, we are going to go through his program and just fill in whatever else is missing. So if we've done a squat variation, now we're going to have to do some type of leg extension to fully train our quads. If we are doing our hip hinge, okay, now we do some type of leg. We need to do some type of leg curl to build the knee flexors of the hamstrings. We need to put in some type of hip thrust motion to build our glutes a little bit better. We maybe need to put in some single leg base work. For upper body day, we need to ensure that we have the horizontal push, so bench press. We're going to put in some type of overhead press as well to ensure we're training our delts, or we could put in some raises either. We could put in a rowing motion that we already have with the likes of our T-bar row or our bent over row, but we also need to couple that with the likes of an overhead pull down too. So we're going to ensure that we have these kind of big moving patterns covered. And then after that, we're going to start to filter in the likes of isolations. That could be your lateral raises, that could be your elbow extensions or your tricep extensions or your bicep curls and so on. We might aim for him to have maybe no more than 6 exercises per session with about 2 to 3 sets each. Ideally looking at him to push to failure on each set, except for the movements which are going to be a bit more high skill. So the movements like for squat, the like for deadlift, the like for bench press, we're maybe telling them to keep like 1 to 2 reps in reserve. It's not pushing all the way to true failure because this could increase his injury risk. But then anything that is going to be more fixed movement pattern, so it could be machine-based movement pattern or something that's going to be safe to fail or an isolation-based movement pattern, we're going to get him to push all the way to failure. Okay. Now this is giving us a framework for both exercise selection, so training movement patterns, and then filling the gaps to the isolations at the end. And then we're having an idea for how hard we should push from the intensity guideline. So again, keeping 1 to 2 reps from failure on the likes of our more free weight or more higher risk movements, and pushing all the way to failure on everything else, which is going to be a bit easier to fail. And we have our volume recommendations, 2-3 sets per exercise. And you could even say if the exercise is particularly taxing, then we can maybe reduce that just down to 2 sets total. So we have our volume, we have our intensity, we have our exercise selection. From here, we are going to keep everything fixed through the likes of the training program. We're going to keep as much things the same throughout the diet as we can. Now, the reason that we're going to keep everything the exact same is just so that we are able to standardize overload across a period of time. So overload essentially is us adding weight or reps to the bar or to the exercise and encouraging overload. So overload essentially is when we are able to adapt to a training stimulus. And when we adapt to a training stimulus, we need to add more reps or we need to add more load to continue giving our body the stimulus it needs to continue forcing an adaptation. Now, this can get a little bit more tricky as you go through diet phase. So it's really important that Declan, he understands that this is the case, and this allows him to bake it into his expectations within a training session. So the expectation when you go through the diet is that for the first couple of months, like if you are especially like Declan is losing at a pretty steady clip, so 0.5% of his body weight loss per week, he should still be able to see progression within his training nearly, especially if he's like 2-3 years into training, right? He should be able to see progression at least every 2 weeks. Okay. He should be able to see some increased reps coming onto the bar or some amount of load coming onto his lifts. For bigger movements, so the compound movements, the likes of his key movements, his squat, his deadlift, his bench, his row, he may be able to add more weight more frequently. But with other exercises, he may just be looking to add reps within a range. So within his training program, I'll tell him that, okay, this exercise here, this is 8 to 12 reps. That's your rep range. Within another exercise, it might be 6 to 10 reps or so on. Once he hits the top end of the rep range, he just adds weight and then he continues the cycle of progression. He'll be able to keep this up for a decent period of time. Now, if he reaches a point where an exercise is no longer progressing, it is maybe getting into week number 3 or week number 4 of not having any movement. He hasn't been able to add weight or he hasn't been able to add reps. And this is why his nutrition adherence is spot on. He's sleeping well and he's not doing anything crazy outside the gym from a cardio perspective. Well, then that may just be a case that we need to rotate this exercise out. So this is how we'll adjust exercises. So if you notice that an exercise is stalling and it's a true stall, recovery factors are in place, and he has just not been able to kind of add anything, we need to just change it out. And I'll change it out for like movement pattern. So an example here could be maybe throughout the deficit phase, he notices that his squats are just like they're feeling worse, right? As a result of feeling worse, he's not able to add more reps. He feels like he's really unstable underneath the bar. He is not able to add more load. Okay, maybe we need to swap this out to something that's a little bit more stable. Maybe now swap it to a leg press. Leg press, guided path of motion, way less stability needed. And from here, we can start this training progression all over again. Maybe he notices the same as bench press. He's losing some body fat now around his upper back, around his chest, around his arse, because he is getting quite lean, right? He's getting towards 10%. Maybe he now needs to change this out to machine press. Again, similar points to leg press. It's more stabilized, guided path of motion, and it is essentially going to be another way for him to progress through the likes of deficit phase before we go back to maybe these movements in time during his gaining phase. So that's just a nice little continue to think about when it does come to making adjustments to exercises during the diet phase. We might be doing lifts that are higher skill, less stable. We want to move towards movements that are more stable, have less skill, and with those movements, we can continue to drive high levels of output. From a volume perspective, we might look at adjusting volume just depending off how he is recovering. So if we notice towards the back end of a diet that he's noticing that this 2-3 sets per exercise is beating him up across all body parts, we might go with a slight reduction in training volume. So we might assess this at the end of the training block. We'll call it training blocks, say 8 weeks. At the end of the 8-week period, we might assess things like recoverability through looking at how are you feeling from an aches and pains perspective, how are you feeling from a progression perspective, from a fatigue perspective. If we notice that maybe fatigue is really high, which it should be at the end of the training block, we also notice that progressions are really, really slow, and there's also some aches and pains, then that might call for him to reduce some training volume, particularly on the areas where he's noticing the aches and pains. And we might just look at this from reducing maybe a set per exercise for that particular joint. And that could be enough of the adjustment that we need to make. But it could also be a case that maybe his recovery is unbelievable still. Maybe he's early on in the life of the diet process. Even if we get to the end of the diet even if we get to that end of the first block within the diet process and his recovery is quite good, we might just assume to keep it where it is right now, because it could just eventually start to drift down as he gets deeper into the diet phase, as he starts to lose more body fat. But during a deficit, I'm not going to have somebody increase volume, because again, we have less resources to recover from, and adding more in when we know that we're going to have less and less as time goes on is probably not a smart option. Now, to keep in line with the 3-tier decision, to keep in line with our 3-tier model for managing adherence and ensuring that we can always win, we need to have one of these for the likes of our training too. Okay. Now, keep in mind, at the very start of the podcast, I did mention that from time to time, Declan gets held back in work. He has to stay a little bit later. This means his time for training is either reduced or he can't make the gym whatsoever. So the way I would look at this is, from the good, better, best strategy, is tier number 3 is just doing his top sets or just one set per exercise from any given day, or just getting in his key lifts. So to keep in line with our 3-tier model for adherence and creating that always winning mindset, we need to have one baked in for training. Because keep in mind that Declan has struggled with training from an adherence perspective too, because some days he has had to stay in work a little bit later. And this has meant that he has missed some training sessions altogether, and he's just in a mindset of, let me just restart the training program next week, or fuck's sake, I've missed a day of training. Now, no point going training for the rest of the week because my schedule's messed up. So we need to have one way for him to bake in long-term adherence. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have a 3-tier model again, and we're going to look at what would be good. So from a good perspective, we can think about just getting our top sets in only, or our first working set of each exercise. So that's one way to look at tier 3 of good. The other way to look at tier 3 of good is that we just get in one set per muscle group for that session. So now that we went through our training, we need to bake in our 3-tier model for creating adherence. Remember that Declan has sometimes had to stay in work a little bit later, and that's reduced his ability to get training in, and that maybe missing a session has caused him to maybe not go to gym for the rest of the week because his schedule messed up. We need to factor in a way for him to get in the majority of his work across the week, or at least having a mindset where something is better than nothing when it does come to his training. So let's go through good, better, best. So good, better, best. Good is going to be that he just does one set per exercise on any given day when he gets to the gym. So if he usually has to do 2 to 3 sets, this is cutting down on his training time substantially. Or another way to actually look at good, because I could give an option here, is either do 1 set per exercise on the 6 exercises, so 6 sets across the session, or let's just do 2 sets on your main compounds. So the volume and time rule remain relatively the same. If he just does his compound-based work, which is, again, going to give you most bang for your buck because training multiple muscle groups, again, you're getting in the lion's share of the benefit that you're really getting from that session. It's not perfect. It's not meant to be perfect because that's what it is. It's just good enough to ensure that he's able to continue moving forward. Tier number 2, which is better, would be that he's able to do all of his compounds or all the volume for his compounds, maybe leaves out the accessories, or he does 2 sets per exercise now. And then tier number 1 is going to be tier number 1, which is best, is that he is able to do his full training session as laid out for him. Now, I've helped a number of clients with this type of approach many different times. Even there recently, I had one of my clients, and he was even saying in his check-in that he only had 30 minutes to train. And he wasn't sure if it was even worth doing a session because he could only get 30 minutes in, and it usually takes him just over the hour to do. So I told him, I picked 3 exercises for the session. I said, go in, do 2 sets per each of those exercises, because the exercises I picked were his key movements, his big compound movements. And he went and did a session, and he built in a bit of consistency and adherence into that week, right? And if he didn't do it, he wouldn't have gotten the benefit of doing those exercises at all. And like, even though he's dropped out of maybe 2 or 3 of the other exercises he had there, he's still getting a big benefit from the other ones because a lot of them were just essentially kind of cherries on top of the work he was already doing. Just the isolations that are kind of filling in the gaps from what he was missing from those particular movements. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind, is having this model baked into your week. And even with the likes of the good enough, right? So you could come into the gym and be like, okay, you know what? I don't have time to work up on my barbell-based moves today. Let me just do my isolation-based stuff. Let me just do my machine-based work, right? It's just doing something within that session versus skipping it all. Now, if you have the option of being able to move your sessions around, that's okay to do, right? So if Declan needs to work a little bit later on a Tuesday and he usually does upper body 2, let's just move the upper body 2 onto Wednesday. Yeah, he maybe trains again on Thursday, and now he does legs on Thursday and upper body on Friday. Let's train 3 days in a row. Cool, that's fine. You know, if you do have to do that like every once in a while, train 3 days in a row, you're not going to die. You know, many people train 3 days in a row. It really just depends on if that becomes a habit or not. If it becomes a habit, well, then we just need to improve our exercise selection so that we're not having any cross interference, or maybe just our split design overall needs to change slightly. So that's just one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at the 3-tier for. So that's just one thing to keep in mind when those come to the 3-tier decision making for a training. Kind of good, which is going to be getting in your main compound movements for maybe just 1 set. You increase your set count up, or even just doing all your movements just for 1 set only. So tier number 3 again is going to be just doing your compound work for maybe 2 sets and maybe leaving accessories, or just doing a set for each exercise. Tier number 2, which is better, is going to be just increasing the volume out by just a set each, or increasing the set volume to like your compounds for a set each. and then leaving accessories or whatever it may be, but something that's a little bit of a augmentation for the likes of tier number 3. And then full program session is going to be the best strategy there. So training is actually relatively simple in the grand context of things when it does come to setting up from a fat loss perspective. So training is actually a relatively easy thing to set up from a fat loss perspective because the nutrition does a lion's share of work. However, the training is relatively easy to set up from fat loss context because the nutrition is really doing the lion's share of work. I think it's also worthwhile to note that when it does come to the actual training side of things, that like the minimum effective dose, it does seem to be able to still increase muscle growth, is getting about 4 sets per muscle group in per week. So like even at a very bare minimum, if Declan was to consider this when it does come to his training goals and not have the all or nothing mindset of if he misses an exercise or he misses a training day, that he's not going to be doing enough from a muscle retention point of view. We know that if he gets 4 sets per muscle group in per week, which is very, very achievable, it's 2 exercises, right? Or even just 1 exercise of 4 sets. I'd probably prefer to break it down into 2 exercises out personally, just based off the fact that like you can get a bit more exercise variety in and train a muscle in a slightly different way. For example, if we look at quads, you could do 2 sets of leg press and 2 sets of leg extension. Then you're getting all your vascular components of the quads trained, as well as the rectus femoris trained. That is going to be a good way for us to ensure that he's getting a sufficient amount of stimulus across the week for the likes of his quads. So after we have the training set up in place, we need to come down to the next component, which is going to help us continue driving more fat loss. So when we're looking at driving fat loss, the nutrition is doing the majority of the work. The training is helping us to retain muscle, and it is helping us to ensure that we are prioritizing fat loss over just total weight loss throughout the diet. But something else that's going to give us a good benefit here is the introduction of both cardio and looking at non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, when I say non-exercise activity thermogenesis, I'm essentially talking about a component of our total daily energy expenditure. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis essentially accounts for about 30 to 40%. Now, we have pretty much the 2 big hitters when it does come to driving fat loss sorted out for Declan. We have a nutrition set up, we have his training set up. The next thing to add in is cardio and steps. So when we actually look at this, we need to look at it through a hierarchy of what is the most important. So nutrition is going to be the primary tool to drive fat loss, okay? Because it's going to be the easiest thing for us to create the energy deficit with. You can easily just take what you're eating and reduce it and get a good fat loss result. However, just keeping your calories where they are right now and just adding in more steps, it doesn't always work out the way people intend it to, unless they're doing abysmally low amount of steps, right? 1,000 steps per day or something like that, right? So nutrition is going to be the key first and foremost. But then we look at the likes of NEAT. But then we look at step count. Are a cheat code for driving up energy expenditure, and they are going to be the easiest way for us to add in more energy expenditure. Cardio is something we can also look at, but we're going to discuss some of the pros and some of the cons of that in a few minutes. But let's just look at step count to start off with. So Declan, he works a desk job, so he probably is getting maybe 4,000, maybe 5,000 steps per day. That's just why he clocks up around the office. Maybe he's walking from his car to work. Maybe he's walking from his bus stop to work or whatever. And then whatever step count he gets after work, when maybe he's again walking back to his car, walking back to the train or to the bus or whatever. But he accumulates 4,000 steps throughout the day. So the first thing I'm going to get him to do is I'm going to get him to increase that up by about 2,000 to 3,000 steps. I'm not going to get him to go straight up to 10,000 steps per day, because this is such a break from his routine. And it's probably something that he tried before. If he's had like this like extreme approach where he slashes calories and increases training dose so much, up to 6 days per week, hasn't been consistent with it, he's probably done the same with steps. He's probably said, hey, I've heard 10,000 steps a day is what I shame for, so let's do 10,000 steps a day. And he consistently fails with it. And again, that is something that has taken away from his ability to get towards those final few percent of body fat that he wants to drop. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at scaling things. So initially we're going to start off with calories only, and we're going to see how that works out for us. So we have to look at a way to scale things up. We can't just go from 4,000 to just over doubling it straight away, because it's not going to be realistic. It's not going to fit within this time schedule, And as well, it's going to be, again, such a break from what he usually does that it's going to feel like a massive stretch. And it's kind of setting him up for failure from the get-go. So let's just go with 2,000 to 3,000 steps per day of an increase. Now, what that does is it makes things a lot more achievable for him. Now he just needs to find out where across the day he can fit them in. And simply adding in like a 20-minute walk across the day, 30-minute walk across the day, he can easily get these 2,000 to 3,000 steps up. So when I'm talking to clients about this, I'm getting them to maybe have a bit of a look throughout the day, a bit of a time audit, and see where we can fit these things in. So let's break it down how he can do so. So we know he's having his 4 meal intervals across the day. So he's having his afternoon. So he's having his 11 a.m. meal, he's having his lunch break, and then he has his pre-workout meal, and he has his evening meal. The lunch break is a phenomenal place for him to get this in. And when I was working full-time, not in a job like a personal trainer, but like previously to working a personal trainer, I was working in a bookshop. Every time, I know, funny, right? My surname is Story, and I work in a bookshop. So every work break, I would get an hour for lunch. And what I would do is once the clock went to 2 p.m, say, I'd go out for a 30-minute stroll, come back, and I've got 30 minutes still to eat. I've gotten in then that additional bit of activity, right? You should be able to do 3,000 steps in about 30 minutes, right? Assuming you're going at a regular pace. Here we go. That's it done. Another way to do this is after each meal, he could add in a post-meal digestion walk if he does have the availability throughout the day, right? Might be a bit unmanageable considering he's working a desk job. But if he had like 10 minutes to get in a walk after every meal, that could both serve a purpose from improving digestion. He gets a little bit more activity baked in throughout the day in bursts. So this could just help him from a general well-being point of view and just mobility point of view. He's not sitting down at his desk for so long. Or he might look even prior to work. Maybe prior to work, he decides, you know what? I'm not actually that far from work. I can actually walk in. Or I can get off the train stop earlier or the bus stop earlier. And now I'm able to walk to my workplace and get in some steps before the day starts. So I can account for maybe a meeting pops up when I'm meant to have my lunch and I can't get that step count in, right? You're able to control maybe a portion of the day where there might be some other things that impede your ability to get in. And this is something that maybe pops up throughout the week for a lot of people. Their lunch break time gets tighter and tighter, or the evening time after work, again, they're running overtime and they really only have time to prioritize the training and then their meal and then get to bed. So getting in maybe early before the day starts is a good way to kind of add in these extra 2,000 to 3,000 steps here for Declan, so he remains consistent with it. So after a period of time of having the deficit put in place, the 2,400 calories or so, his extra step count added in, cool, right? We've got this like set up here where he's doing like 7,000 steps across the day. He's adhering to his 2,400 calories. He's adhering to his training. All right. Now we're starting to see some fat loss happen, and it's coming at it very easy. And it's coming very easily relative to what he was doing previously. Now, what do we do if we want to increase the ante, right? Maybe we've hit a bit of a plateau. So we've hit a weight plateau on the scale. And what I would determine a weight plateau by is if your weight is remained the exact same for pretty much 2 weeks. So if you remember from the very start, we talked about the weight average. So it can be common enough that you go through the week, how your average weight, for example, we're going to use Declan's weight here. Maybe he's gotten to 73 kilos. Now, he comes into next week and it's still 73 kilos. He's 100% adherent. What do we do? Do we make a change? Well, what I actually do is I'd say, hey, let's give us another week. Because sometimes this can just be water retention masking some of the effects of fat loss. Because maybe we see in his visuals, in his pictures, he's actually looking a little bit leaner. He's still noticing his performance is good in the gym, but the weight is just not shifting. Let's give it another week. So we want to have a bit of patience here if we do see a little bit of a saw. So if you see more than 2 weeks of a saw, that's when I'll make an adjustment. And how do we make that adjustment? So what we might do is you might look to make a slight adjustment down of calories. So we look to pull from carbohydrates and fats. We maybe pull them down by about 200 calories or so. So make coming close to about a 10% reduction. And then what we can also do is you could maybe also add in an extra 2,000 steps. Okay. This just accounts that if the drop we made was actually not great enough, well, then we're definitely going to be creating enough of a deficit because we're coming at it from two angles. versus just reducing the likes of our calorie intake. And now because we've done this over time, even though initially if he was to go from 4,000 to 9,000 steps, it's still manageable because he's gotten into a routine of doing the 7,000 steps. So doing an extra 2,000 is not going to be that much more of a stretch, especially when you break it down into the time component of it. And then as well with the likes of the drop down in the calories, the 200 calories down from the drop from 2,400 calories down to the drop from 2,400 calories down to 2,200 calories. Because he's gotten into a rhythm with his 2,400 calories, it doesn't seem, again, like much of a drop as if he went from 2,900 to 2,200. And this is just keeping up with his rate of change. And it's continuing to allow him to move forward without having to uproot his life and put extreme measures in place. Now, once he gets to a place where maybe we've made these adjustments, but we are starting to find that even with 9,000 steps per day and even with 2,200 calories, that we are not really kind of getting where we want to be, and we're starting to have a bit more of a slowdown. Now, this doesn't always happen. Some people will be able to adhere to a certain level of steps and a certain level of nutrition for the entirety of their fat loss phase and make no adjustments. It's a good place to be, but it's not always realistic. Some people have a bit more of an adaptive metabolism and need to make more changes. But at this stage, for Declan, it's actually impractical for him to add in more steps. It's already taken up enough of his time. And this is where actually adding in some cardio becomes a little bit more beneficial, because when we do add in some cardio, we're adding in some more condensed activity and a bit more of a higher rate of burn of calories within a shorter period of time. So we might go with something that's maybe a bit more moderate intensity, say, because when we look at steps, realistically, if you're going at a brisk pace, it's already low intensity, steady state cardio. But if we do something like, okay, let's do 20 to 30 minutes on an exercise bike, and we'll do that on your rest days. So now on rest days, he's still doing 9,000 steps, but he's now adding in like an hour of cardio a week. Okay, cool. We have an hour of additional calorie burn. We maybe say that we're increasing our calorie burn within that session within those 2 days there by 600 calories across the week. I'm just kind of using a rough heuristic of like 100 calories per 10 minutes. So he's added in an additional 600 calorie deficit, and that's helping him to continue to move forward. Alongside that, we might look again to continue making an adjustment down by about 10% from his calorie intake. And we will just kind of keep using that type of approach until we kind of reach our point of success. Now, why moderate intensity and not high intensity? This is where there is a bit of, I guess, preference as well as some smart placement of cardio types around your training. So moderate intensity, steady state, where we're maybe on an exercise bike or stair mill or the likes of cross trainer, for example, they're not going to have as much of a negative impact to your training as high intensity cardio will. So high intensity cardio, true high intensity cardio is going to be doing like sprints on a bike or on a cross trainer or row or wherever it may be, okay? You're looking at something that's going to be very, very high intensity, but you're still going to have a rest time after it. So a very common method here is like the 4x4 method, where people do like a minute of work full on. So this could be like an assault bike. They go full pedal to the metal, 60 seconds all out work, 3 minutes active cycling. Then they repeat that 4 times. Now that's your high intensity session done, right? So this could be something that is very effective for somebody who is time poor. However, it comes at a cost. The same level of recovery is required for that as it is from your resistance training session, because it is like pretty much the exact same. You think about like a set of an exercise in gym is going to take you around a minute to complete if you're performing an exercise with good control and push it to a high level of intensity. The exact same is said for this type of modality too. So we do need to keep that in mind. But again, if you're somebody who's time poor, you don't have an extra 30 minutes to put into your week on 2 days per week to add in some moderate intensity steady cardio. Okay, let's put in some high intensity steady state. Now, where will we put this? And this is also important. So when we're looking at our cardio component, we want to ensure that it is placed far away from exercises that it will impact. So what I'm talking about here is you're doing your high intensity steady state cardio, this real like sprint based type training. And again, this is just one example. You can make this in different type of modalities for sure. But we want to probably space it away from the likes of our leg training sessions, right? So an option here would be if at the end of his training session, at the end of an upper body training session, he has time to do some high intensity steady state, but he doesn't have time anywhere else. Let's do it there, because maybe he does lower body 1, upper body 1, high intensity cardio after, rest day, and then he has lower body again then on the Thursday. Upper body the following day, and then high intensity steady state after that. Then he has 2 rest days. Or he does his second high intensity steady state on the Saturday, which would give him a full rest day of doing nothing until he goes back to Monday and goes back to lower body 1. So that's another way you could do it. Or you could just have one high intensity steady state and then one moderate intensity. So that could be, again, maybe on his first rest day of the week, so Wednesday, he does his moderate intensity steady state. Won't have much of an impact to recovery coming into his leg session the following day. On the Saturday, then he has his high intensity steady state, easy, well, not easy gym session, but something to knock out the weekend, kind of get him into the bit of mood of consistency and adherence, and makes him feel a little bit better, getting something hard out of the way at the start of the weekend. And then Sunday he has a full day of rest, and then he's back into legs on the Monday. But I rarely use high intensity steady state with any of my clients. Most of the time, we can knock out a really good fat loss approach using just nutrition, increasing steps, and then adding in cardio when it's needed. Personally, I've never done cardio in any of my fat loss phases. It's not been needed because I've been able to drive up my step count enough and my calorie intake down enough to allow me to just continue moving forward. And as well, from a preference point of view, from an adherence point of view, I don't really like doing it. And some people will probably feel the exact same, and they'll probably have more preference towards driving up steps. There's a lot you can do with just nutrition and steps before you need to start adding in. I'm not talking about health benefits here. I'm just talking about driving body composition change. And then if you were thinking about modalities as well in regards to exercise recovery, which is an important point when it does come to fatigue overall across the fat loss phase, is that you want to pick one that you know that you can recover well from. So when we're looking at modalities of cardio, we want to consider ones that have a high concentric component. So concentric essentially means just like more muscle contraction activities. So an example here is going to be bike. So bike is a really, really good one to throw in if you just want to ensure that you're not having too much of a recovery deficit built up from doing cardio. Doing something like running is on the far end of the spectrum because there is more eccentric activity in the likes of your hamstrings. That's why people feel their hamstrings and glutes are so fucking fried after doing runs. But also there are more forces that we're dealing with relative to the likes of a bike. When you're a bike, you don't have to have your heels striking the ground or anything like that. So there's no forces to absorb. When you're running, your foot, your knee, your hip, they are all absorbing all that force. And that does add to the recovery depth. And it can be something to consider if it is a modality you want to add in for the likes of your resistance training and getting the most benefit from there, so that you have as much energy to train as hard as possible from a lower body perspective. So for Declan here, considering he's a gym bro, I'm just going to get him to do bike if we have to do that. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And that bridge will be when we have run up to the top end of what he can handle from a step component, and that's fitting in within his time, as well as what he can handle from the calorie perspective too. So in regards to, so we've already talked about how I would make adjustments from both a calorie point of view, a training point of view, a cardio point of view. But one thing that is going to be really important for Declan throughout this whole process, especially if he's working with me, right, considering I'm a coach, is that he is keeping a good log of his data. So with a client who's working with me for fat loss, I'm getting to track their scale weight, as I mentioned already. We're getting that onto a 7-day average as well across the week. We're tracking their calories, their protein, carbs, fats, their fiber, and we're tracking that all in some type of spreadsheet or onto my training app. Alongside that, we'll take progress pictures every single week. So I'll get them to take progress pictures in the same lighting, same time of day, same day, and without any food or fluid. And as well, of course, with the same lighting. We're doing this to essentially standardize our physique assessment, which is going to be a very important factor when it does come to assessing fat loss. Because ultimately, we could be losing weight, but not losing fat. And that's going to be something that we need to keep an eye on. As well as it's giving him a little bit more positive reinforcement. If he sees every single week after being adherent to the plan that his visuals are getting better, that's just only going to stoke him. That's only going to push him towards wanting to be more adherent and being more excited for the process, because he can see that even this more flexible or this less or intense approach is getting him the result that he wants to. And he can't believe how easy this is. And now this is going to allow him to see that in the future, if he ever wants to do this again, he doesn't have to go gung-ho to get the results he wants. He just needs to go about it in a smart way. So the progress pictures help as that positive reinforcement. But I also give him a bit of accountability. He knows every week he needs to stand in front of the camera and send these pictures over to me. He is going to want to be that little bit more adherent, or else he gets called out on his non-adherence. And, you know, when I call people out on their non-adherence, it's more so, hey, what did you struggle with? Okay, this is what you struggle with. Okay, these are some strategies that we can put in place that we should be able to work in this week. It's not a case of somebody checks in, they have a bad week, and I grill them or roast them and tell them what a shame they are. No, that's not how coaching works. And it definitely is not something that breeds long-term enjoyment of the process at all if people are getting shamed into their goals. Something else we can layer on top of that is going to be measurements. Now, measurements is something that I will use sparingly with clients because sometimes they can be even more tricky to take than pictures. Pictures are going to be very easy to take. You buy a tripod on Amazon, you get a Bluetooth clicker, and you're able to take your pictures very easily like that, right? With measurements, there is a bit more kind of, I guess, messing around with them because we want to ensure that when we're taking them, we're keeping the landmarks the exact same. So when we're looking at measuring our arms, for example, go around the widest point. We're measuring our glutes or hips, go around the widest point. When we're measuring legs, I typically will just go underneath the glute. When we are measuring our chest, I'll just go underneath the armpit or across the nipple line. And with the likes of our stomach measurements, I'm going to pick 3. So I pick 3 because we'll be able to see fat loss take place from a top-down process where we start to lose the least amount of fat, or the fat moves the slowest from the likes of our lower abdomen, whereas we can see good change across 2 inches above from our belly button, then from our belly button area, and then 2 inches below. And this just gives us more data points to run off when it does come to assessing the body fat change. If we see that our limb measurements are holding and our stomach measurements are decreasing, as this is a really good sign of body recomposition, as well as fat loss is taking place from where we want it. Now, if we see that trend lines are going down overall, it could be a case that we're losing just some muscle mass. However, this is also a caveat. If you are somebody who is very, very high in body fat, you might just see things go down overall because you have so much fat mass to lose. But if you're 16 to 18% body fat, you will probably see most of your weight come off the likes of your midsection. You'll probably have some more come off around your chest as you get a little bit leaner, and more off around your legs as you get leaner again. But they shouldn't be going down at the same clip as the likes of your waist measurements. And this would be, again, something we can put alongside the likes of your weight measurements, the likes of your pictures, and see that take place. And this is like a tree, and this is like a gold standard measurement assessment I use with clients, so we get the best data possible for making adjustments long term, as well as keeping people adherent. Alongside that, though, we're also going to be keeping track of the likes of training performance. So with our training setup, which we've already discussed, we're going to be keeping track of the sets, the reps, the loads that you're using, and we're going to be using that as a way for us to assess performance. If we see that we are continuing to make progressions across the entire diet, that's phenomenal. If we are seeing that we are having too many stalls pop up, it could be a case that our volume is too high or the deficit is too hard. But I will generally come at this from a point of reducing training volume first, because if we're keeping it in line with the rate of loss, well, then it's not a case that the deficit is too difficult. It could be a case that we're just doing too much work overall, and that needs to be adjusted. We can also keep track of things like our hunger and our mood. So this is a really important factor when it does come to the nutrition component, which we discussed. If we see that hunger and mood are really like mood is low, hunger is high, well, maybe that calls for some intervention in regards to meal setup, meal timing, and structure. So we need to keep on top of looking at that, because it is going to be something that's going to be a barrier to adherence long term if they are not managed. And there's plenty of different other strategies we can put in place other than just the food sources, which we talked about, to help with manage hunger, such as decreasing the amount of time it takes you to eat a meal, chewing your food more slowly, using smaller bowls and smaller forks and such, as well as just ensuring that your food volume does not decrease just because the likes of your calorie content is also decreasing. So food quality can just really help at mitigating a lot of that. But then other things that really bake into feedback we should be tracking is going to be sleep, but the quality and the quantity. So we can just measure quantity in regards to the time you got to bed and the time you woke up, and then quality on a 1 to 5 scale of the worst night of sleep ever, and 5 being the highest, and 5 being I feel like Superman when I woke up. Ideally, we want to ensure that our quality is really high and our quality is staying 7 hours or more. Now, obviously, some people will note that their sleep quantity maybe reduces to get leaner and leaner, but quality is still the thing that we're looking for. Quality essentially would be you're waking up in the morning and you feel recharged, refreshed, and ready to take on the day. And if these things are both going down, well, then maybe it's a point of intervention to say, okay, do we need to adjust our sleep times? So, say, for example, if Declan is having poor quantity because he's staying up really late playing Xbox and he's waking up early then to go to work, the easiest fix here is to get him to go to bed that little bit earlier. I know it sounds easy, but you'd be surprised how many people struggle with just going to bed that little bit earlier. And that could just be a case that they feel like they haven't rested enough in the evening time, or maybe they've had too much caffeine during the day, and that's impeding them from getting to sleep. But just getting a consistent bed and wake time can be a big problem solve for this specific situation. Keeping consistent bed and sleep time is the number one tool when it does come to improving your sleep quality. And if we improve sleep quality and sleep quantity, fat loss is so much easier, training performance is better, your hunger and mood is so much more stable throughout the day. And then the final thing we look at is going to be pumps and muscle fullness. So this is something that maybe Declan has experienced when he's gotten towards the later stages of his fat loss phase, and he has been able to break past that 12% mark. So as he gets towards the 12% mark, he finds that his sessions in the gym are just kind of dead. Like, now, obviously, he's doing too much volume first and foremost, but he's feeling that his muscles are dead, right? He's getting towards the end of the session, he's not getting any pumps, he just feels flat. Now, it could be a case he's getting to the point where he doesn't need a weekend binge. He doesn't need to, just sack off the gym altogether. Maybe what he needs right now is he just needs to have a bit of a refeed across the weekend. Now, a refeed and a binge day are completely different, right? Your refeed essentially is a strategic increase of carbohydrates or calories to help with decreasing feelings of fatigue, or to help increase glycogen within the muscle tissue. As we decrease calories, as I talked about at the start, decrease calories and decrease carbohydrates, particularly, our muscle glycogen is going to decrease. Glycogen is going to be the primary fuel source that we're using during training to help us to achieve good muscular contractions, that alongside proper hydration and sodium. But if we are glycogen depleted, we're going to find it very difficult to get a good pump, and we're also going to find we feel quite flat. Now, there is an old saying in bodybuilding that you need to get flat to lose the fat, and that is very true. But at a certain point, if we notice that performance is stalling, we're feeling very flat in the gym, and maybe even weight is stalling, that we need to have a slight increase in carbohydrates for maybe 2 days at a time. So we'll just bring Declan's calories or his carbohydrates back up to a maintenance level, and we'll have that for 2 days, and we'll monitor what happens, right? If all goes well, he will, by the end of that refeed period, where he's maybe just increasing the carbohydrates to his regular meals, so he's not having like too much additional food reward coming into the program and having lots of hyperpalatable foods, which may be taken away from adherence. He's just, again, increasing existing carbohydrate sources. He finds that when he comes back to the gym Monday, training performance is better, he's getting better pumps, and we also notice a big drop in body weight. Now, this is a more advanced strategy, but it is something that really does work towards the end of fat loss periods. I think when you are early on in a fat loss period, you don't need refeeds. It's only really the case when you're starting to get quite lean and you are getting to that like more kind of flat feeling, and you're noticing that the fatigue from the deficit is getting quite high. Another arm to that is going to be diet breaks. And this is going to be planned in for people who are doing very long and extended diet periods. Now, a diet break essentially is an extended refeed where you are just bringing calories back up to maintenance. You might have a preference towards, again, driving up more carbohydrates. During a 2-day refeed, it's unlikely that you're getting full glycogen restorage, so it might take a little bit longer, and this is where refeeds really kind of play a role. But one of the biggest benefits they're doing is just going to give you a psychological break from the diet. A diet break would just be an entire week of increased calories up towards maintenance, and you might plan this in, again, for extended diets. So if somebody has 24 weeks of dieting, right? So Declan here, he's doing about 12 to 16 weeks, did I say? So maybe at the 8-week mark after his first stint, he does a diet break at week 9, then he does a further 8 weeks and he has his diet done, okay? Now, I will ask clients throughout the dieting period when they feel they need this diet break coming up. Because for some people, it's just more suitable for them to have it when they have something coming up, or it could be an event, a holiday or something like that, and we just have that to be the diet break to break it up. So it's put in sometimes for strategic relief where we're actually combating the effects of the diet, or for some people it's going to be plugged in from a life perspective. So for Declan, considering he's struggled with long-term adherence before, we might just say after 8 weeks we're going to plan in this 9th week of a break we're going to refresh, reboot, and it'll get ready for the final 8 weeks. So we're breaking up into 2 phases. So one could just be that little bit easier. To start the diet phase is always easier. We refresh for the second leg. That's going to be that little bit harder, but the light is now at the end of the tunnel. And now, by the time that he gets through these 16 weeks of dieting, he has now gotten himself to 10% body fat. And now the tricky part begins. The tricky part here is what you do once the diet is finished. From here, what I would get Declan to do is I would actually get him to do a bit of a reverse dieting approach, where we bring calories up linearly up until we get to a point where weight is starting to stabilize. Considering he's gotten to a place where, you know, he's at 10% now, he's not terribly famished. Like, you know, he's definitely, like, he'd appreciate more food, but he's not noticing any mad negative effects from the likes of the dieting process, because he's went about it in this slower fashion. He's retained a lot of muscle. He's been able to keep his calories relatively high. He hasn't been doing anything extreme from a expenditure point of view or from a calorie point of view. We can start linearly increasing calories. Now, if he was very low in calories, very high in total energy expenditure, then we maybe start to just bring him straight up to maintenance. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring his calories up slowly. So we might increase calories up by about 10% at the very start. So going up from the 2,400 calories, if we ended there, which was probably unlikely, we bring him up from 2,400 calories up straight to 2,600 calories. And then we'll go for a week in that, see what happens. He notes that he has better fullness within the training sessions. He's feeling fuller. He's feeling like he is getting more satiated with all the foods he's taking in. But we notice his weight is continuing to drop. Okay, cool. We're still in deficit. Let's bring calories up once again. Maybe go with maybe a 5 to 10%. So we have a bit of a range here, depending on how much of a deficit he was still in. And that's just based off how many grams of body fat or how many grams he lost from one week to the next. So again, if he lost like still under if he was still over the rate of gain, so if he was still in line with the rate of loss that we had initially, we'll go with the 10%. If he was a little bit lower, so maybe 300 grams or so, we'll go with the 5%, okay? Just so we're not overshooting the mark. And we'll do this all the way to the point where you notice that across the 2-week period that his weight is starting to stabilize. And we'll see through this as well, because he's gotten quite lean now, right? Bear in mind, he's 10%, he has visible abs, he's vascular, he's looking fantastic, right? Because when you get to that like initial like body weight where you've achieved that body weight goal, you are going to be flat, right? So you need to fill out. Muscle glycogen is going to be very, very low. As you fill that out, you're going to look even bigger and more impressive. You've gained weight, right? Because muscle glycogen is going to pull water into the cell, but you look more impressive overall. Then from here, we need to decide what his future goals are. But if you're wondering, well, you talk about calories here, but what about the likes of the step count? Are we going to adjust that? So the first thing I'll pull out once we get to this weight maintenance point of view. So we first increase calories, we keep step count and cardio as they are. Once we get up to the weight maintenance, okay, now we're going to start to maybe kind of take one thing at a time. So I'll put out cardio first and foremost. Now after that, maybe a few weeks down the line, maybe 2-3 weeks down the line, maybe kind of reduce step count down. However, Declan might appreciate doing all his steps now, right? He might appreciate doing 9,000. He doesn't want to go back to 4,000. So maybe he keeps his steps within a range of like 7,000 to 9,000 per day. And that's just what he does habitually now. Now, the big part about this is that he doesn't go back to his old way of living. He's still having his training set up to be relatively the same. Maybe we're able to handle a tiny bit more volume now that we're in a bit more of a fed state, or we just get more benefit from the current training program we need to do. Maybe we don't need to change that at all. With the likes of the nutrition, the main increases have come from the likes of carbohydrates and fats, but he's still tracking his nutrition. He's still thinking about structuring his day. He's still thinking about structuring his weekend and adhering to pretty decent food sources, but he can afford to have a little bit more flexibility. Maybe at the weekend now, he's able to add in some different meals. Maybe he's able to go out for like more kind of dinners out or whatever like that at the weekend, but you still keep it accountable towards him. The big thing when you do exit the diet phase is that you don't just forget all the behaviors that caught you there. You need to take what you learned from the diet. You need to learn what you took from the diet, and now you're just doing it with more freedom. You have more calories. You have less time constraints when it does come to cardio requirements, and so on. But we can talk. But the standards you had for yourself and for your body composition, and that like mindset around a 3-tier decision model for both the nutrition and the cardio, for both the nutrition and the training, that is still intact, because that ultimately is going to be the thing that's going to breed long-term success when it does come to manage body composition once you get lean. Because if you have flexible standards and you have wiggle room and you understand the realms at which you're working in, that is the thing that is ultimately going to allow you to keep this as something you can do all year and for the rest of your life. And it's why so many people set themselves up for failure. They get to the fat loss goal. They got there through inflexible standards. They're coming into the free living now. They want that flexibility back, and they don't know exactly how to do it. So hopefully now you know exactly the areas you should be focused on from a nutritional point of view, from a cardio point of view, from a training point of view, to continue kind of moving forward and continue getting jacked and juicy for the rest of the time. All right, that's the end of the episode. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, give me a comment, right? If you did, let me know. Give me a text on Instagram. If you have any questions about it, particularly, do kind of reach out to me there. If you're interested in coaching, if this sounds like the approach that would work for you, this is how I do it, right? This is how I help clients get in shape, and it's the exact same system I use for myself too. All right, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a rating review podcast platform you're listening on. And other than that, we'll catch you in the next one.